right, go ahead.
All right, another punishment for me. Week late.
And we're off. Oh no! Liquor to beer, you're in the clear.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, hosted by Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your hosts, Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. As always, getting to the end of the regular season in week 13, getting a little playoff scenarios, getting everything's kind of shaking up a bit, and a lot of questions still. Only 3 teams have clinched playoff spots. Same thing as last week, so no one's really improved their position too much to guarantee that they're in the Beltway Wars playoffs. Patrick, week 13, couple interesting close matchups, including yours and mine matchup, basically. I'm going to ask you a little different question.
Thank God.
Who was the most impressive team or the most impressive win in week 13?
Oh, most impressive win.
There's a rating
was
for
it?
this.
Let's see. Okay. You've taken me by surprise again. I wasn't ready for that one. I would say it's probably look, Alex's win over me because it essentially kept him alive, basically. Without that win, he would have been out. We'll talk about it in a little bit. He still has a chance, but I think Scott's win, and being the highest scorer with 149 points, needed to keep pace with you to keep that same record, to have a chance at sneaking into the playoffs at 6-7 right now, beating Tom in a huge comeback victory.
Yeah, that would have been my pick as well. Scott, needing Jerry Jeudy to really pay off for him, and my God, does he have the revenge game of his life. We'll get into that when we get into the individual matchups, but let's go with the Rankings Rewind. Rankings Rewind! Okay, Pat, let's lead us off here.
All right. Well, this week we don't have too much movement at the top of the board. Charlie and Sarah essentially maintain their positions at 1 and 2. Charlie won his 3rd in a row this week. Sarah dropped this one, but did remain in 2nd place. The only 9 and 4 team. Charlie at 10 and 3 at this point. In fact, this is okay. Yeah, same thing. I stayed at 3. I similar to Sarah, I lost this week to Alex. I remain in the 3 position. And right now, Charlie, Sarah, and myself are the only teams that have clinched a playoff berth at this time, which is, I think, the same as last week. We have both clinched last week and are still so no teams clinched in week 13, which is wild, from 4 onward. Speaking of 4, actually 4, 5, and 6 are all 7 and 6 teams Jake and Dustin win to advance to 7-6. Brian takes a loss, drops 2 spots with a loss to fall to 7-6. That's 2 straight in a row that Brian has taken on the chin this year. And then you maintain your final playoff position at 6-7. You get your second win in a row. Scott, the other 6-7, is tied with you in win-loss record, but is behind by about 50 points in the point total, which makes a huge difference in this case. And then we'll talk about it in a second, but all the 3, 5, and 8 teams are technically still in it. Alex in the 9 spot, Tom in the 10 spot, and Josh in the 11 spot. These are all teams that are still alive, so only one single team left that is completely out of it, and that is Mike, which was the case last week. 3-10, he's 2 games behind the next person, so it's a wrap.
So yes, he is knocked out of the Beltway Wars Invitational. Good luck next season.
Knockout!
So, in continuing with the rankings rewind, we're going to go talk about some playoff scenarios. Some things that could happen, some things with the seeding, maybe that last playoff spot, since that's basically what half the league is going to be going for here. If you just want to start at the top, we can do that. We didn't really plan this out too well, but the top here, I mean, obviously, if Charlie wins, he gets the first round bye at 11-3, so he is a win and a first round bye. Sarah can get the first round bye if she wins this week and Charlie loses, but she is behind in points as well, about 50 points. So she would need to outscore whatever Charlie's point total this week by 50, which we're going to get into it. Could be possible because there are some bye week troubles for Charlie this week. You're in the three spot. If you win and Sarah loses, you can go up to the second spot. You cannot get the first round bye, so you can move yourself up to second. Then we have Jake, Dustin, and Brian. The 3 of these teams that I'm most comfortable with is Jake. Even if he goes to 7-7, his point total is the highest in the league, so he's going to win any tiebreaker. I would say, in college football style, he's a 99% chance to make the playoffs here just because of that large point total and being at 7 wins. Same kind of thing with Dustin as well. Very high point total, 7-6. Might change the seeding if he loses and like Brian wins, but I think it's pretty safe to say that he will be in the playoffs as well. But the last 6, or the last 5 really, are kind of up in the air here with Brian, myself, Scott, Alex, Tom, and then we can just say that the 11th spot with the low point in the league, Pasadena Plague, needs a lot of things to go for him and needs to score like 250 points this week to have a chance to get in with the tiebreaker. So I would say he's a below 1% chance to make the playoffs this year. Anything to add with that you found interesting?
Not really. Other than, with a loss and, if Jake wins and Dustin wins and Brian beats me, I could very well fall 2 or 3 spots with a loss this week. So like I could go from 3 to 6. It's kind of interesting, like if you go from 3 to 6, you're basically flipping with somebody. I'm 3 right now. If I fell to 6 and say Brian, moved up or Jake moved up, I might still be playing a similar team if these standings sort of invert. But right now in the 3 spot, I would probably end up playing one of the, you, Brian, Scott, somewhere in that range. So just interesting, the different things that could still happen.
I think the most interesting team on here is the Owings Mills Ogres, just because of the point totals. If me and Scott lose and he wins, he currently is only 11 points behind me. So if he outscores me by 11 and I lose and he wins, he could creep up to the seventh last playoff spot, which would be a hell of a season for Alex
Yeah.
on the preseason when we had him graded as one of the lowest graded teams in the league. So that would be quite the turnaround, and a 6-8 team getting into the playoffs would be kind of fun. It reminds me of the Seattle Seahawks many years ago, going 7-9, winning their division and getting into the playoffs, and beating an 11-5 Saints team. So anything can happen. You just got to get in. But let's go over to our first matchup of the week, and we kind of hinted at this, we talked about it a little bit, but that would be the Westminster Wonder Boys going to 6-7 on the season, 149.52 for the league high in points this week, to the Finksburg Freaks, 124.85-8 on the season. Starting with Scott, Josh Allen has a great day in the Blizzard game. 2 touchdowns throwing, 1 receiving, 1 rushing, the trifecta there, and an odd scoring decision by Sleeper and ESPN. Rashad White has 11 carries for 76 yards, 1 catch for 8 points. Bijan Robinson, 26 carries, 102 yards, a touchdown. Also very involved in the passing game as well, 6 for 6 to 33. Jared Jeudy in the revenge game, as I mentioned, 9 for 13, 235 and a touchdown. Also adds a 2-point conversion for 36 points on the week. Terry McLaurin, also a very efficient day, 8 for 8, 73, 2 touchdowns against Tennessee. Michael Pittman, 5 for 7, 42 yards for 6.7 points. Sam Laporta, not the yardage, but goes get in the end zone twice, 3 for 6, 6 yards, 2 touchdowns for 14 points. Curtis Samuel, who was a late fill-in for Scott, as Keon Coleman was out of this one, only has 1 carry for 7 yards. Jake Elliott has 6, and Houston's defense has 3. On the bench here, just a little bit interesting, I guess. Caleb Williams has a really nice day, 26 points. Zach Charbonnet does get a red zone look, does score a touchdown. Alex Pierce also scores a touchdown as well. My leader for Scott's team has to be Jared Jeudy. I mean, my goodness. What a game to snatch victory from defeat against Tom. His best game probably as a pro. 9 catches, 235. A touchdown, 18 yards per target, 26 yards per catch. Really flourishing without Amari Cooper there, and Jameis Winston now becoming the quarterback in Cleveland. Has a good rapport with him. Now has 5 straight games of double-digit points. Jared Jeudy.
Yeah, at the beginning of the season, if you would have told me that one of the most compelling primetime games of the year was going to be Denver versus Cleveland at Mile High, I would have kind of had some skepticism about that, but this was really a phenomenal game. You had just about everything. You had offensive points, you had defensive points, you had turnovers, you had a typical Jameis game, and maybe most interesting of all, you had a Jerry Jeudy revenge game against the Broncos, a team that he has played for the last couple seasons, was sort of ousted in the new sort of Sean Payton regime. He wasn't one of Sean Payton's guys in Denver. He goes to Cleveland and has this amazing kind of storyline arc throughout the season of, Watson really struggling to do anything for that offense, and then Jameis coming in and just gunslinging, and that's exactly what he was doing last night against the Cleveland Browns. 9 for 13, 235 and a touchdown with a 2-point conversion mixed in there. I think they said on the broadcast that was the most points that a team has had in a revenge game of all time by about 20 points. I think Terrell Owens had like 215 in a game in 2008, I think it was. So definitely doing something that nobody's ever done. You could tell his emotions were into it. He was giving it to the crowd. He was giving it to the Broncos players and the sidelines. And it was just really fun to watch, and a huge, huge performance for Scott in a really critical week.
Yeah, and I actually have some audio from Scott because I was texting him during the game. So I have some audio here for our listeners. You're not going to hear it, but our listeners will.
I'm at the
Okay, so Pat, you'll have to listen to that to hear that. But who was the bleeder for Scott Squad here?
I'm gonna go with Michael Pittman
Yeah.
in a game where he was just 5 for 7 for 42. The 7 targets, should be fine, but this offense in Indianapolis has just been too inconsistent. It's just still the growing pains for Richardson. Um, Despite playing 92% of snaps, he comes out with just 6 fantasy points in this game, and it's now the one, two, three, four, fifth time in his last 6 games that he hasn't reached double digits in fantasy points. He had a streak kind of earlier in the year where he did that 3 straight games,
Yeah.
being 11 or more, but he has really been in a bit of a funk. Doesn't have a touchdown since week 6 against Tennessee. So just a guy who's really struggling. He will be on bye next week, but Pittman was my bleeder this week.
Yeah, and not a touchdown since week 6, which is really disappointing. Alex Pierce, kind of the red zone guy, it seems, there in Indianapolis. Wide receiver now 48. I mean, what a drop off. Last year, wide receiver 15 to end the season. Might end up outside the top 50 this year. Very disappointing with a pick in the 5th round.
Yep. Now, heading into next week, Scott, in terms of the bye situation for him, he has some names that are on bye here. So Scott, in about as close of a must-win game as there could be in fantasy, I think again this coming week. Right now, on the outside looking in, he's going to have some bye issues here. He's got Terry McLaurin, who had a great week this week with 23 fantasy points. He is on bye for Washington. Michael Pittman, his other starting wide receiver, is also on bye. We've talked about his struggles, but still, that kind of volume is tough to replace when you're starting a guy in week 13 like Curtis Samuel. You've got some issues there at depth at that position. Alec Pierce, one of those options of depth, is also on bye this week. Tyler Lockett is an option. Maybe one of these running backs, Bigsby or Charbonnet, could be flex plays for you next week. But Pierce, Pittman, McLaurin, and then the Texans defense, currently not rostering another defense right now, and that's probably not a team that you're dropping. So, a little bit tough for Scott next week.
Okay, but let's go over to the losing side here, and a really heartbreaker for Tom, going to 5-8 on the season. Tua has a nice day in cold weather. We kind of talked about that a little bit. 365, 2 touchdowns, 25 points total. Brees Hall, 12 carries, 60 yards, 2-point conversion, does lose a fumble for 6 points. Gus Edwards in his first game without J.K. Dobbins, only 6 carries for 32 yards, 1 catch for 3.8 points. Brian Thomas has 1 carry for 11, 4 for 10, 76 yards and a touchdown, 16 points. T. Higgins, 5 for 10, 69 yards with a touchdown in a very high-scoring game there against Pittsburgh. DK Metcalf, 4 for 9, 66 yards, 8.6 points. Mark Andrews, 6 for 7, 67 yards and a touchdown, 15 points. Westbrook Akina has 2 touchdowns against Washington, 19 points. Brandon Aubrey has 8, and Indianapolis has 5. On the bench, he decided to go with Tua again versus Patrick Mahomes. That was a good move. He only scores 16 points there. Nothing really else to really talk about too much. Travis Etienne does have 13 carries, which you like to see, 7.3 points. My leader for Tom in this one, let's talk about Westbrook Akina for a second here. Has 19 points here, 2 touchdowns on a very bad offense, but his last 6 games, he only has one of those games where he was under 10 points. 10, 13, 4, 18, 11, 19. So on a bad offense where they trail a lot, he seems to be getting a lot of work. 8 targets being his most of the season, scoring 2 touchdowns. And he has a touchdown in every game except one since week 6. So looking for him deep, looking for him in the red zone. Very underrated player coming on when Tom really needs it.
Yeah, kind of a surprise guy here. I mean, you definitely, once DeAndre Hopkins was traded to Tennessee, I don't know that we necessarily thought too much or talked too much about the fact that, maybe if Will Levis continues to improve, which he has done in recent weeks, that maybe a second receiver could be viable there. Ridley continues to be startable, as you know. Nick Westbrook-Akine, just based on his touchdowns alone, his targets now 6 or more in 4 of his last 5 games. Um, it's there for him, and Will Levis continues to improve. This is a guy with a amazing second half schedule. He's taken advantage of that in the last 3 weeks, and he's got nothing but green coming up. So definitely a nice free agent find late in the season for Tom. Talk about another team next week that's going to need a win. He's got a guy like Westbrook-Akine that you could kind of comfortably throw out into the starting lineup.
Yeah, for sure. Just very impressive. Like I said, a horrible offense. Their defense is horrible. But they get in that catch-up mode where Will Levis is going to throw, and he seems to be the main beneficiary as of right now. But who is your bleeder for Tom's squad?
Well, my bleeder this week has to be former Raven, Gus Edwards, 3.8 fantasy points this week. Getting the start, trying to shake things up for Tom, having to sit here Travis Etienne, who has been struggling of late. Etienne does end up with 13 carries on the bench compared to just 6 for Gus Edwards. Only had 32 yards in this one, caught 1 ball, but I think you maybe thought that it would be him as the lead guy with Dobbins hurt. He does boost up to 52% snap share, his highest of the season in this game against Atlanta, but just didn't get very many opportunities. I don't know off the top of my head how many rookie Kamani Vidal had. But surely, if Edwards had about 50% of the snaps, I'm guessing that Vidal had the same amount with as many, if not more, rushing attempts. It was a low-scoring game against Atlanta. It's not like any team was out of it at any point in the game, so I don't know that it was a game script type issue. 5 yards a carry, pretty good, but just 6 opportunities is disappointing.
For sure. Any bye week issues for Tom next week?
Tom, remember, had his sort of Armageddon, if you will, a week or 2 ago.
Yep.
He's pretty clear, aside from Mark Andrews here, doesn't currently have another tight end to start, so we'll need to pluck somebody up. And Justice Hill, the only other really bye issue, and I don't know that you'd be starting him anyway.
No, for sure not. And, thinking about last week where he had the bye again, still got the win. So now he's at basically full strength, minus Mark Andrews, and that's what you need when you need a win to get in, at least have a chance to get in.
Yep. Now let me ask you, because we've been doing this, I think 3 straight weeks we've done this now.
Okay.
Mahomes next Sunday night at home against the Chargers in Arrowhead, or Tua Tagovailoa Sunday against New York, also a home game for Miami?
I don't think you can sit Tua right now. 3 straight games of over 20 points, throwing a lot of touchdowns. They can't run the ball. Talented wide receivers. Everything's going well for him. He's too hot to sit right now, I think. Agreed.
It'll be interesting. I think we both may have said Mahomes last week, perhaps.
Yeah, because of the cold weather, but it doesn't seem to bother him there. He had 46 attempts in that one, so you'd like to see that as a Tua owner. But let's go to our next matchup, and that's going to be the Pikesville Pink Pony Club getting their victory against the Pasadena Plagues, who have really fallen off here. 135.88, 7-6 to 93.76, 5-8 on the season. Going through Dustin's squad, Lamar Jackson having a great day, even in a Ravens loss, 2 touchdowns, does run for 79 yards as well. Kenneth Walker, 16 carries, 49 yards, only 5.6 points. DeAndre Swift, 11 carries, 39 yards, 2 for 3, 35 for 8 points. Justin Jefferson, 7 for 9, 99 yards, 13 points. Drake London, 9 for 16 targets in this one, but only 86 yards for 12 points. Cortland Sutton, 6 for 9, 102 points. Brock Bowers, 10 for 14, target monster, 140, and a touchdown for 25 points. Ramondre Stevenson, 18 carries, 73 yards, for 10.9 points. Dicker the kicker, 13. And Green Bay's defense has 8. On the bench, I guess the only real thing to talk about is Keenan Allen and Adam Thielen. Both had nice days here. 8 for 10, 99 yards, a touchdown for Thielen. And Keenan Allen 5 for 8, 73 yards and 2 touchdowns for Dustin. My leader for Dustin, I mean, just go with Lamar Jackson. I mean, we've talked about the other ones. We talked about Cortland Sutton last week. We've talked about Brock Bowers, but Lamar Jackson now, number 1 overall quarterback, number 1 overall player in fantasy football. My concern is now he's on a bye this week in a game that Dustin would like to win. So, you're losing the best player in fantasy football. He goes 23 for 36, 2 touchdowns. Like I said, runs for 79 yards, which is his 3rd highest rushing amount this year. Really a hard player to lose going into the last game of the season, in the regular season.
Yeah, even though I'm constantly obviously watching Ravens games, I'm watching Lamar Jackson week in and week out. I don't know if there's another player, and maybe there is, but obviously I'm invested more in this team than any other, but that he can have such a frustrating game, and the Ravens offense can be so awful looking as they were this week, and somehow he still comes out of it with 25 fantasy points. Ends up with decent numbers, not great efficiency through the air, but still 237 and 2 touchdowns and 79 yards on the ground. So he's just game proof. I mean, you're starting him week in and week out because even when the Ravens offense has a bad day, he's so much a part of what that offense is trying to do that he is going to come away with a very high floor. I mean, 25 fantasy points, you would not have thought it just watching that game and experiencing the emotions that we are as Ravens fans. But 25 fantasy points is a huge, huge game for him against a really tough defense.
Now, what I will say is, let's say Dustin does get into the playoffs here. You have the Giants in Week 15. That's a plus-plus matchup. But then you have Pittsburgh. And he always struggles against Pittsburgh for whatever reason. It's his lowest point total of the season against Pittsburgh earlier this year. You had to start him, but that's just something to keep an eye on. Second round of the playoffs for Dustin is that you might not get the superhero Lamar Jackson that you're used to getting because he's playing Pittsburgh, and they seem to have his number. Who is your bleeder?
I'm going to kind of just mention the 2 running backs here. 2 guys that Dustin has really relied on all season. Kind of have down games. Neither one of them gets into the end zone. Neither one of them were particularly efficient. Kenneth Walker ends up with about 5 fantasy points, just 3 yards per carry. That's now 4 of his last 5 games under 3.3. So that's not very good efficiency, and not too many particularly difficult matchups there for him. 61% of the snaps is fine. You'd love to have that tick up a little bit. It's his lowest since week 8. It was a tough matchup for him against the Jets, but still you hope for a little bit more. DeAndre Swift ended up with about 8 fantasy points, but 11 for 39, not great. He really salvaged his day with 2 catches for 35 yards, but also a guy whose efficiency has just been not very good lately. 3 of his last 4 under 3.7. 4 of his last 5 under 3.7. So has not hit that 4 yards per carry mark very many times in a number of weeks. And, it's not a good time of the year for your running backs to sort of be in a dip.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any easier for Swift. He has San Francisco, Minnesota, and Detroit as well as the next 3. So tough matchups there. Kenneth Walker has Arizona, Green Bay, Minnesota. So also not great matchups there.
Not great.
Either for either of those 2 players. Bye week issues. Anything to talk about?
You mentioned the big one. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens defense, if he was considering starting them, I hope he was not, but the rushing defense has been good. But obviously both of those will be on bye. So will Cortland Sutton, who has been, we've talked about him in recent weeks. He has had such an incredible season for Denver. As they've played better, he's played better. So that's kind of a big loss at
Yeah.
this point in
Wide
the
receiver
season.
number 7.
Number 7 for him for sure. And Ramondre Stevenson, also a guy who has, maybe not as much been in the starting lineup. Maybe he's a flex guy for Dustin in a lot of these weeks, but just another guy that is not going to be an option for Dustin. So some pretty big names on bye next week.
Okay, and let's go over to the Pasadena Plague, now 5-8 on the season, 93.76. Starts Bo Nix here, kind of has a down game in what was a huge, very large scoring game. 18 for 35, 2 touchdowns, does throw 2 picks for 12 points. Najee Harris, 16 carries, 75 yards and a touchdown, 6 for 6 through the air, 54 for 21 points. Pacheco, in his first action back, only gets 7 carries for 44 yards, 5.4 points. Puka Nacua, 5 for 8, 56, and a touchdown for 14. Wan'Dale Robinson, 2 for 2, 6 yards for 1.6 points. Demarcus Robinson, 2 for 3, 49, and a touchdown. George Kittle, in that snow game, very quiet, 1 for 2, 7 yards. Zach Ertz, 3 for 6, 35, and a touchdown for 11 points. McPherson has 8, and Kansas City has 5. Going on the bench, nothing really to talk about too much other than Cedric Tillman missing this one. Romeo Dobbs maybe could have been slotted in there somewhere. It's desperation time for Josh. I mean, like we said, his playoff hopes are more than slim at 93 points. So he needs a win and a lot of things he needs a big win next week and a lot of things to happen for him to even have a chance. But starting with the leader here, let's go with Najee Harris, 21 points. Only running back number 21, which I don't really expect. I thought he'd be higher than that. But does have his best game of the season in this one on only 52% snap count, 16 carries, 75 yards, and a touchdown, 4.6 yards per rush, and involved in the passing game, his most catches of the season as well. So very impressive day. He has Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, so kind of hard matchups there. But the Steelers seem to rely on the run. They get both running backs involved, and he should get the work to be, a running back 2 in this last game of the season.
I mean, I think we've talked about Najee before, and what we said about him is his role is so consistent. There's not really too many guys that you can trust to get, between 40 and 50, 40 and 60% of the snaps, playing basically just half the snaps. But, getting as much volume in those scenarios. When he's on the field, he seems to be getting the ball 16 or more carries in each of his last 6 games this season. So his volume is definitely consistent. It's generally high for him. Does have some difficult matchups coming up: Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, all tough teams to run against. But, he's been a consistent guy for Josh the entire year. And, obviously you're hoping that he can get another win to give Josh a chance.
Okay, and who's the bleeder for Josh this week?
The bleeder this week. I guess it's going to be the what I think is maybe the lowest scoring game by far for George Kittle on this year. That situation with the 49ers just continues to get worse and worse. This has been a miserable season. It's been a great season for Kittle as the number 1, now number 2 tight end in fantasy. Held the number 1 spot for quite some time. But just 2 targets in this one, despite playing 100% of the snaps.
Yeah.
In a game that they were behind in Buffalo. Granted, the conditions were difficult. People were slipping and sliding all over the field, but you'd like to think that getting beat as big as they did with him on the field the whole game, that they might have been able to get him the ball more than twice in this one. So just a miserable performance, by far his worst of the season.
Yeah, I think this is more of an indication of how bad Purdy was. He did not look comfortable at all playing in the snow. Obviously, no one really is, but Josh Allen had a perfectly fine day. He just looked lost completely, especially when they lost Christian McCaffrey. Just didn't have a plan. Like you said, wide receivers were slipping everywhere. A down game, but they're not going to be playing in those conditions, at least probably for the rest. Well, Chicago next week, so maybe. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Before we
it's just
before we get into bye weeks, I do want to ask you about Isaiah Pacheco. This is obviously the first game that he came
yeah.
back from injury. 7 carries, 44 yards, targeted once through the air, played 37% of the snaps, 7 carries. What do you make of that stat line, and what do you think that bodes for him moving forward in some really tough matchups ahead?
I mean, I think that's to be expected. Um, I'm assuming it's going to go higher. The Chiefs are, the best record in the AFC. They're going to ramp them up. I could see it going to 50% next week, then, back to the 60, 65, 70% rank style with I don't think Kareem Hunt's role is going to, go away all the way. I think that he's going to be a part of that, but it's he came back from a really horrific leg injury. Was to be expected in his first game action in what was it, like 10 weeks. So yeah, to be expected. Okay.
Eye
Well,
situations. It's
mhm.
rough right now for Josh actually entering this final week because
Not to give him any more bad news.
right. Well, I mean, he's in a bit of a roster crunch at the moment. He's got Zach Ertz on bye. Had a nice week, 11 fantasy points this week. Has Will Disley, his only other tight end on the bench. He was 0 for 1 for 0 points this week in the game at Atlanta. That's the Chargers tight end there. So an issue there, but perhaps the bigger issue is at quarterback. Bo Nix, who had that magnificent game last night. He only had 12 fantasy points in that game, despite the Denver Broncos winning a high-scoring one there last night. He will be on bye, and Trevor Lawrence, his backup, was knocked out of his game with a really
Literally.
ugly looking concussion. Yeah, absolutely. So tough situation there at quarterback and tight end. I think Josh is probably going to have to find one of each here before Week 14 begins.
Yeah, I don't see Trevor Lawrence playing next week at least, and they might just shut him down for the rest of the season, just of where they are right now. So yeah, it's time to go to the waiver wire, it would seem. But let's go over to our next matchup, and that's going to be Charlie, who is now 10-3, the first double-digit win total of the Beltway Wars Invitational, 129.42 to 120.50. The Cockeysville Cox goes to 7-6 on the season. Charlie starts Matthew Stafford here. Has a fine day. Only throws for 24 times, but 183, 2 touchdowns. Is questionable. Don't really know about that. Derrick Henry, a fine day for any other running back, but not for Derrick Henry. 19 carries, 82 yards, 12.6 points. Jonathan Taylor, though, 25 carries, 96 yards, and does have a receiving touchdown, 16 points. Smith and Jigba only has 4 for 4, 74 yards. Cooper Kupp, down game for him, 3 for 6, 17 yards, 3.2 points. Nico Collins, 8 for 11, 119, 15.9 points. Jonnu Smith, who we talked about last week as the leader for last week, has an impressive game in this one as well. 10 for 11, 113, 16 points. Jacoby Myers, 6 for 11, 97 yards. Boswell has 16, and Washington defense has 10. On the bench, Sam Darnold does outperform Matthew Stafford for 19 points. Javonte Williams, 4 carries for 1 yard and a touchdown. Such a weird stat line. And Devontae Smith was out against Baltimore. My leader for Charlie is going to have to be Jonathan Taylor, who, kind of struggled the last 2 weeks, 6.5, 3.5 against the Jets and the Lions, but against New England has 16.8 points, 3.8 yards per carry, 96 yards. Not much involvement in the passing game, but that's to be expected with Anthony Richardson, the way that he runs the ball. Has the bye week in Week 14, so he's not going to have him next week, but Denver, Tennessee, and the Giants. Kind of tougher matchups, I would say. I can't really tell on the desktop, but you like that Giants matchup if Charlie can get to the championship game.
Yeah, 25 rushing attempts is his high on the season. He's now in over 20 20 rushing attempts in every game, but 3 this season. Did miss a few with an injury there in the middle part of the early to mid part of the year. But 25 carries this week is good for RB13 for fantasy points, 16.8 points this week. Playing 80 to basically 85 to 100% of the snaps in all of his games recently. I mean, just a workhorse guy. He's kind of resumed the role that we knew that Jonathan Taylor can be. He may not be getting as many touchdowns as he did earlier in the season or in his heyday, but he continues to prove to be a workhorse back in the NFL.
Isn't it funny that you said heyday and he's only has 4 years of experience?
Wow, he seems
like he's been around for a while. Yeah, I was just thinking that when I saw that.
Boy.
But yeah, he came into the league in 2020, ended up number 5 in that season. So yeah, kind of a rough year for him, being running back number 24, but seems to be getting it together, and they're trusting him a little more, maybe getting more comfortable with Anthony Richardson now at a good part of the season. So who is the bleeder?
The bleeder this week for Charlie's team. I mean, generally pretty good across the board. Really, the only thing that stands out is Cooper Kupp with an uncharacteristic 3 for 6, 17 yards. The Rams get the win over New Orleans 21-14, but Kupp only 6 targets. That's his fewest in any game, tied for his fewest all season. Week 2 was the last time that he had 6 targets. He's generally, in that 8 to 12 kind of range. With a couple outliers on the high side, but 3 for 6, just not a very productive day. 2.8 yards per target also is his lowest by far of the season. So just not a really good one for Kupp. Better days ahead for sure. He's been so consistent, coming off of 5 straight double-digit games in fantasy. Has a rough one here, and his schedule's difficult with Buffalo and then San Francisco and the Jets his next 3 weeks. So a little bit tough of a matchup for Kupp, but wasn't able to get it done this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most glaring part of his stat line is the targets. Only 6 targets. You're used to seeing him double-digit targets basically every single time. So I don't know if it's concerning or not. If it's just the way the Rams played, or the Saints played the Rams this week. Just take away Cooper Kupp, let someone else beat us. But yeah, you're playing him if he's playing, so you gotta keep him in the lineup. Okay, so I'm gonna sit back and relax here because you're gonna go on for a minute. Bye week problems.
Yeah, this is going to take a little bit. Charlie really planned this perfectly if this was his plan. I mean, to be 10-3, the number 1 seed, you have still a pretty good shot. Even if you lose, you have a pretty good shot of securing that number 1 spot, and has all of his buys in this Week 14 game that doesn't have huge implications for him. There's an outside shot that if he loses, he'll bump down to the number 2 seed, but he is in the driver's seat. So you're talking about missing your entire running back core here. You're talking about Derrick Henry. You're talking about Jonathan Taylor. You're talking about Javonte Williams. And you're talking about J.K. Dobbins, who is hurt and on IR for the Chargers. So all 4 starting running backs for this team are out. There are currently no healthy running backs on this team that can even fill 2 spots. So, it'll be interesting to see. I guess Charlie is going to need to make a move, but who do you drop now on this team to go get running back? So it's possible, man. I mean, the thing is, Charlie needs to, if he loses, he needs to beat Sarah by he needs to maintain a point margin over Sarah. I think it might be 30 or 40 if I'm not mistaken. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah. But
it's a tough spot to figure out what to do here. Nico Collins also on bye this week. So lots of issues for Charlie, and it'll be interesting to see what he decides to do here. We just talked about his opponent, Tom, next week, who is
had his bye week last week.
He is through all of his buys. So yeah, very interesting matchup and interesting owner decisions for Mr. Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to have to drop one of these 2 quarterbacks and figure out which one he wants to ride to the playoffs. Just whoever has the better matchups through the playoffs. But tough spot for Charlie, but not really in terms of season. He's 10-3, and on the inside track to have the first overall seed.
It's interesting. There is an odd strategy that I wonder. I'm just kind of thinking in my head, like if you truly don't want to drop any,
I know you're going to say this, and this is something that I wasn't going to bring up because I didn't want to put it in his mind.
Well, I'm curious to see if you would do it, but would you drop the kicker and just go without a kicker this week? If your goal is margins, if your goal is to maintain a point margin over Sarah, even if you lose, you say you bake that into the cake. You say, I'm going to lose. I just can't get crushed. I just can't score 50 points this week. I can't be the low scorer on the season in this week. So, like, to get a running back, and if you don't want to drop a player, do you drop Boswell, get a running back who has maybe more opportunity to get, well, I don't know, even if a running back has more opportunity to get, well, there's one guy that has more opportunity to get 19 fantasy points like Boswell had in week 6, or 13 points like he had in week 7 and 8. Like, as far as kickers go,
he's the best one.
He's the best one. So,
I mean, he's
just
number
an
one.
interesting strategy. So. I guess that's not what you were thinking, though.
Well, yeah, I would just say my strategy was more extreme. Just don't drop anybody, and just field the team.
Go without 2 running backs,
and then just say, like, if I'm the second seed, I'm the second seed, and just think to yourself that you can beat whoever your roster's talented enough just to beat whoever you play in the first round. But I think that's something that needs to be at least announced by Charlie that that's what he's doing to the league.
I don't think so. Why?
I don't know. It seems because there's playoff implications with terms of Brian and everybody else too.
I don't know. I think it's a strategy to put all your guys on bye, take a loss in 1 week, and
It would be funny if he did that and then he still won. That'd be really funny, actually.
Well, basically, Tom filled out his roster, but yeah, it can happen.
Okay, but let's go over to the Cockeysville Cox 7-6 on the season. Kyler Murray, kind of up and down as he's been all year. 31 for 45, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, runs the ball for 7 times for 15 points. Josh Jacobs has a nice day, 19 points, 19 carries, 43 yards, a touchdown, does catch the ball 4 times for 74. Joe Mixon, 20 carries, 101 and a touchdown, 4 for 6, 18. Jamar Chase, 6 for 9, 86 and a touchdown for 17 points. Amari Cooper, 3 for 3, 12 yards. Did have that nice play to Josh Allen, but doesn't get any points for it. Valet, 1 for 4, 16 yards. Shoemaker, 5 for 6, 33 yards for 5.8 points. Brian Robinson, 16 carries, 103 and a touchdown. Fairbear has 13, and Detroit has 7. On the bench, Russell Wilson, 26 points, 3 touchdowns, 414 yards. We don't see many 400-yard games out of quarterbacks anymore, so that's something interesting. And Hunter Henry, just to mention there, 7 for 9, 75 yards against Indianapolis. My leader is going to be Jamar Chase. And this is the reason why I bring it up. He's now the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. I have never seen a team that is so fantasy good, like there's so many players you can play in fantasy, be so bad. And what they do is they get in such a deficit that Joe Burrow just starts throwing the ball and all these people just score points. And it's the craziest thing to me. It happens every week. And it happened again this week where, Joe Burrow down multiple scores, gets them back in the game, gets T. Higgins involved, Jamar Chase, all these players, and he has a nice day here. Number 1 overall wide receiver, right now in week 13.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a receiver that is so good over the middle and can find soft spots in whatever defensive coverage over the middle part of the field as Jamar Chase. He's constantly catching those over the middle balls, stopping, pivoting, and changing direction and kind of making the most in yards after catch. He's really a phenomenal receiver. He does things that nobody else does as consistently and as sound as he does them over the middle part of the field. Super high scoring game. Like, frankly, his numbers could have been, more had Burrow not thrown a couple picks maybe in this one. If those offensive possessions they maybe would have had 5 more minutes of possession time, he could be, definitely into double digits for receptions. Or at least targets, if not receptions. We've seen him do it before. So yeah, I mean, totally. We've talked about it. Number one pick, I think, next year, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely in the running.
No argument from me.
Okay, and who's the bleeder?
The bleeder are going to just have to be a combination of the other wide receivers. We talked about Jamar Chase, but who else is at the receiver position? Right now, it's Amari Cooper, 3 for 3, 12 yards. That thing in Buffalo just isn't working very well for him right now. That turned out to really be a killer for his value in fantasy, that trade to Buffalo in the middle of the season. Devon Vele getting the start here, despite that big point total for Denver. He doesn't do much. He has his worst game since week 9, 47% of the snaps, just 4 targets and 1 catch for Vele. And then on the bench, Debo Samuel sits Debo Samuel here. Just 2 fantasy points, 4 for 5, 20 yards, and a fumble lost. Again, a game that they were trailing, understand the conditions, but just like Kittle, a low fantasy point in a game that you're down by so many is just disappointing. So, some buy issues coming up that we'll talk about in a second, but this wide receiver core is definitely decimated right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little higher on Debo now just because of the injuries at the running back position. You have to see that coming back a little bit where he's in the backfield a little more. Um, Also, though, what I want to bring up to you, he's returning kicks.
Hmm.
And that is, I mean, you usually don't have your number one wide receiver returning kicks. So they don't view him as the number one wide receiver. So he returned 6 kicks in this one. So his value, I mean, the 49ers are dropping like flies. At some point they're going to have to get him the ball. He's a talented player. Um, I'm not so, this Buffalo game was so weird just with the horrible, horrible conditions. I kind of put a damper on how bad some of these people scored just because it was awful. I mean, you couldn't throw the ball. So, a little higher on Devo now, just with a lot of the news coming out of 49ers from the 49ers about all the injuries and stuff. Would be interesting to see if he benches him again in week 14. But let's go to bye weeks. Any bye week issues for Brian?
Yeah, lots for Brian as well. An important game against me this coming week, week 14. Brian Robinson is going to be on bye. Joe Mixon is going to be on bye. And then you've got tight end issues. I feel like we've talked about tight end issues for several teams. I feel like you might see more tight ends taken in free agency and waivers this week than any week this season because you've got Jake Ferguson for Dallas, who missed this game, his second straight game that he missed with a concussion. If he still can't get out of that concussion protocol until late in the week, he's got a Monday night game. So I don't know that you have confidence there. And then Hunter Henry is on bye. So both tight ends in questionable situations there. Henry's not questionable. Henry will not play. And then you've got also Devon Vele, who didn't do much this week, but he's been a pretty consistent option at wide receiver. And Kaimi Fairbairn, same thing. Are you going to drop the number one kicker to go pick up, in this case, to go pick up another kicker? But the number 2 kicker in fantasy, so, may have to make some space by dropping somebody else. But I don't know, not a whole lot of droppable players right now on this team.
This is starting to become a theme now. There's so much bye week problems that after this week, there'll be some talent on waivers. If people decide to make moves to fill out our roster. So that's very interesting to kind of think about in terms of the future. But let's go to our next matchup. I think that's going to be me. I get the win. I'm now 6-7. The Union Bridge Barracudas 120.86 to 118.82 for the Orchard Beach Ovaries. 9-4 on the season. Starting with my squad, Jaden Daniels has a great game. 206 yards, 3 touchdowns. Does run a touchdown in as well for 27 points. Christian McCaffrey, not so much. I got 5 games out of him this year. 7 carries, 53. Does leave the game with a PCL injury. Is out for the season. Tony Pollard, 8 carries, 35 yards, 4 for 6, 33, and a fumble loss. Mike Evans, though, 8 for 12, 118 and a touchdown, 21 points. Malik Neighbors, 8 for 13, 69 yards, 11 points, and their loss against Dallas. Jawan Jennings, 3 for 5, 56 yards, 7 points. Trey McBride, 12 for 12, 96, 15.6 points. Calvin Ridley, 2 for 7, 45 for 5. Bates, 13, and Minnesota had 4. On the bench, Rico Dowdle has his best game of the year. 22 carries, 112 yards, and a touchdown. And Marcus Valdez-Scantling just catches touchdowns, it appears, for the Saints. Recently signed him and has a touchdown in every game he's appeared for them. So interesting there. My leader has to be Mike Evans. Well, now, I'm actually not going to say Mike Evans. I'm going to say Trey McBride, because he has a very interesting stat line. He does not have a receiving touchdown this year and is the number 3 tight end.
Crazy.
Which is crazy. He is a target monster. He has 12 targets in this one, 15 targets last week. He catches all of them. They're short to intermediate passes. He has 96 yards in this one, 8 yards per target, so nothing too crazy. 8 yards per catch, that sort of deal. Has Seattle, New England, Carolina, so, matchups there. But Kyler Murray looks for him, and he seems to be the favorite target of Murray. It was Marvin Harrison for a little bit there, but he is very trusted in the middle of the field, and he hasn't even scored a touchdown yet. So still tight end number 3 without any touchdowns on the season.
Yeah, really, really impressive what he's done. I mean, him and Brock Bowers both have been so impressive this season. The targets alone are just crazy. The efficiency, he's 24 for 27, 24 for his last 27 receptions to targets. Nearly hits the 100-yard mark for a third time this season, just falls just shy at 96 yards. But yeah, I mean, as consistent gets, as rough of a season as it was early in the year for the tight end position. McBride, as many imagined, would emerge as one of the top options at the position. His targets have been great all season. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 top 10 tight end finishes. So really incredible what McBride has done. And that Arizona offense is looking, pretty decent, I think, of late. So he's been a big part of it.
And who is the bleeder for my squad?
The bleeder this week. Well, we're going to talk about your injury issues in a moment, but I wanted to take your temperature on Calvin Ridley.
Okay.
We've seen Nick Westbrook-Akine emerge as a viable number 2. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins exit for Kansas City. We've seen Will Levis get better in recent weeks, but we've seen Calvin Ridley's production tick down just a little bit. His 3 lowest targets since week 4 have been in the last 3 weeks. He's still playing, a huge percentage of snaps, 100% this week, but hasn't been basically a startable receiver in 2 of the last 3 weeks with a 5-point and a 7-point game. How are you feeling about that? Just 2 for 7 this week.
I'm a little bit concerned, but I feel like now teams have to start taking into account Westbrook-Akine, which I think will create more opportunities for Calvin Ridley. I think that Westbrook-Akine was kind of hidden a little bit. I don't think he's hidden anymore. And I think the teams have to kind of game plan around him, which will give Calvin Ridley more opportunities. The one thing I will mention to you, I love his matchups coming up here. Jacksonville, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. Cincinnati, that game, Tennessee's not going to stop the Bengals' offense. They're going to have to throw. I think that he'll be good there. Even Jacksonville, that's a very juicy matchup as well. So, I'm worried, but I really like the matchups, and he will be playing next week. So, yeah. And a revenge game for Jacksonville, so maybe he'll have a little extra pep in his step. Bye weeks.
Yeah, well, as you know, Jaden Daniels,
Yep.
who has been your, unquestionable starting quarterback most of the season, is on bye this week. Normally, that wouldn't be too big of a problem with Brock Purdy filling in, but that situation, we've talked about it several times on this podcast episode, that the 49ers are in dire straits right now. They are basically on the brink of, not making the playoffs this year. Energy just seems to be totally down. You're already having issues with your running backs there for the 49ers, both of them, CMC and Mason, leaving this game, going on IR, both of them McCaffrey for the second time on the season on IR. And Brock Purdy having to fill in for Jaden Daniels without a lot of his top playmakers available. So I don't know. What do you make of that whole 49er situation?
I mean, I didn't see where Jordan Mason got hurt in that game. But yeah, I mean, I've been playing fantasy football since middle school, so over 10 years. I mean, over like 20 years, I guess now. I have not had a more disappointing first round draft pick in all my seasons than Christian McCaffrey. Now you could say you know, like, you draft a guy in the first or second week and he goes out for the year, whatever. Like, that happens. But they came in camp saying that he was fine, and he misses 10 weeks. So it's like that sort of thing is just very, very disappointing. Now on IR again, we'll miss the rest of the season, at least the next 4 weeks, which is our fantasy season 14, 15, 16,
Yeah.
17. So he is done for the year because he is officially on IR.
Both of them are.
Yeah. So
Mason's not listed in sleeper, but all indications are that he's going to IR. So at least you're going to free up 2 roster spots tonight.
yeah, great. But yeah, I mean, talking about Brock Purdy for a second, I think that he has a lot to prove. Just how horrible that performance was against Buffalo. Now he's at home against Chicago, so he's at home, so the weather's going to be good. He's going to have the fans behind him. Doesn't have his top running backs, so I think he's going to need to throw the ball a little bit. And that connection with Juwan Jennings is good. He seems like the most trusted wide receiver there. So maybe I can get some double points out of Juwan Jennings and Brock Purdy. I think that he will. I think Brock Purdy. I don't know if this is a bold prediction or not, but I think Brock Purdy clears 20 points this week.
Okay.
Okay.
And hopefully for you, that would be mostly to Juwan Jennings.
Yes, I hope all of it's to Juwan Jennings. But let's go over to the other side here. The Orchard Beach Ovaries 9-4, still in good position here. Jalen Hurts 11 for 19, 118, a touchdown. Does run a touchdown in as well, 17 points. Chase Brown 12 carries, 70 yards and a touchdown, 3 for 3, 30 yards. Devin Achane 7 carries, 14 yards, 8 for 9, 56 and a touchdown. It's very weird. The first 3 points are 17, 17, 17. CeeDee Lamb, 2 for 6, 39 yards, now questionable, but is expected to go in week 14. Starts DeAndre Hopkins, 4 for 9, 90 yards. George Pickens, 3 for 6, 74 and a touchdown. Evan Ingram, 7 for 9, 41 for 7 points. David Montgomery, 21 carries, 88 yards in their win against Chicago. McLaughlin, 15, and Miami with -1. Looking on her bench, this was kind of not shocking, but I guess I kind of scratched my head at this. Sitting Ladd McConkey instead of DeAndre Hopkins was kind of head scratched a little bit at that, but I was glad she did because he had 16 target monster there in not San Diego. I was going to say L.A. I will say this as well. I was very lucky with Juwan Jennings getting that last catch for 20 yards to give me the victory. But if Chase McLaughlin missed the field goal in overtime for 50 yards, and that would have won her the game. So, yeah, I'm very glad that he did miss that there. But my leader, let's see, who's the leader going to be? I'm going to go with Chase Brown. Now we're running back 14 on the season. 17 points here, 81% snap count, has a great yards per carry clip, 5.8, a touchdown, involved in the passing game as well. In a trade with you earlier this year, last 5 games have scored over 10 points. Dallas, Tennessee, Cleveland. So you like the Dallas one, but Tennessee and Cleveland are kind of tough. Even Denver, I would say, is pretty tough. But he seems to be a plug and play each and every week, just with the high-powered offense he's on.
He does. I mean, game script be damned. 12 carries, 70 yards, gets involved in the passing game. I mean, he is the guy. I mean, tell me off the top of your head who's the backup in Cincinnati.
I don't know.
Don't know.
Look.
Don't know.
No, it's Khalil Herbert, by the way.
Oh, it's Khalil Herbert. That's right. The midseason trade to get Khalil Herbert. I mean, look, consistently 80% of the snaps in his last 4 games after Moss got hurt. He has been a top 10 running back in all 4 of those weeks. He is just a week in, week out fantasy starter. He's got a great matchup coming up next week against the Cowboys before kind of ending the season with a couple tough matchups, actually. Tennessee, Cleveland, and Denver in the fantasy playoffs. So it gets a little tough for Brown, but his role in the offense is, pretty consistent in terms of his playing time.
Mm-hmm. And who is the bleeder?
Just 2 observations here because there's not a whole lot of bleeding going on in the starting lineup this week. Really impressive in this loss for Sarah. Really, the Dolphins defense being the only defense on Sarah's team right now. They are the 27th ranked defense on the season. Would love to have somebody else here. They have -1 in this game, playing the Dolphins going into Green Bay in the winter. That was not going to be a good situation. McDaniel looked like he was shivering the entire game. There's some fun made online of him for that team. But the other thing that I would say here is just a disappointment for a guy like Tajay Spears, who I know as the Pollard owner, you kind of were fearing that maybe Spears returning from injury in the middle of the season, he would start to become more of the 50-50 guy that he could have been, in the draft. I think there was some concern for Pollard because Spears was a pretty viable backup. Just one rushing attempt on 25% snap share in this game against Washington. They were game scripted out of this, but I think anybody that's been holding Spears throughout the season, throughout the injury, would be hoping for more than a single carry in week 13.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like they see him as just a guy. I know at the beginning of the season there was some talk about, before they traded for Pollard, that they really liked him and he was going to get more looks, and then they signed Pollard for money. Like, it wasn't like a small contract. So that's just how they feel about him. He's the scat back kind of guy. He was the Shane Vereen of the Tennessee Titans right now, but without the talent for catching the ball. So it's, he's just a guy, it would appear right now, with Tony Pollard leading the way there. Bye weeks.
Sorry, I'm looking up the last season that Shane Vereen he's played in. 2018 was his last season. So
that's a throwback machine.
Yeah.
I just know you love Shane Vereen. That's why I mentioned it.
Well, because earlier in the show when you said, "Oh, I guess I've been playing fantasy for 10 years," and he said, "Oh, maybe it's been 20." I thought some of these old school names are a giveaway that it's he came into the league in 2011, so. He's been around. He was around. And I know you love those Patriots running backs in those days. What was I gonna say?
Who was
Bye
what
week.
was his name? Ridley,
Okay, who?
the running back for the Patriots that always
Oh,
hated. It was something
yeah,
Ridley.
yeah, yeah. It was Ridley. I forget his name. God, they had a lot of guys.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no bye week issues for Sarah at
Okay.
all, really. Like two backups, like Noah Brown and was it Noah Brown and Jeremy McNichols, both Commanders. McNichols, with he's not going to be very involved as long as Robinson is healthy, so not really missing a whole lot for Sarah. She's projected 122 fantasy points, which generally, even in a week where there are not a lot of bye concerns throughout the league, 122 is a pretty healthy projection. So Sarah with a very good chance to move to 10 wins.
Okay. Let's go to our next matchup, and that is going to be. Take a peek here. That's going to be Jake's matchup here. Jake, the Carlisle Cheddar, go to 7-6 on the season, 116.28. To the Columbia Clown College, now 3-10, eliminated from playoff contention, 107.34. Starting with Jake, starts Justin Herbert. Not a great game, only 147 yards, no touchdowns, 7.9 points rather. Saquon Barkley against a tough Ravens rush defense anyway, has 100 yards and a touchdown, 2 for 4 for 10, 18 points. Alvin Kamara, 23 carries, 112 yards, 4 for 6, 7 yards, 13.9 points. Garrett Wilson has 10 targets in this one, 41 yards, 6.6 points. Devontae Adams catches a touchdown for 66 yards. Jalen Reed also has a nice game here, 3 for 6, 24 yards, and 2 touchdowns. His 2 of his 3 catches. Cade Otton, 4 for 7, 20 yards, 4 points. Tyrone Tracy, 9 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. 2 for 3, 33 for 13 points. Sanders has 3, and Pittsburgh has 15 points with giving up 38 points, which is kind of wild. Looking on the bench, Jordan Love was on the bench here. Scores 18 points. Elijah Moore also has a good game. 8 for 14, 111. Leader. Let's give some love to Jalen Reed again. He had that huge week 1, the 31 points. Kind of been up and down, had a 23-point game, a 13, 18 points in this one, his third best game of the season. Only 67% snaps, only 6 targets, but does score 2 touchdowns and still wide receiver number 8 on the year.
We're talking about Reed as wide receiver number 8 on the year.
Yep.
Wow, I would not have expected that. And part of the reason is he's had some dud weeks recently. He's only been over 6 targets once on the season. That was in week 4, and he has either basically 2, 3, or 4 targets in 4 of his last 6. So his volume generally is down. He has only had 2 or 3 targets basically in every game in the second half of the season. 2 or 3 catches. So his just volume is not great. We've talked about Green Bay's options there. He does have good matchups coming up. Obviously had a great top 10 performance in week 13 against Miami, but I don't know. I still feel like he's a little bit not consistent enough. He has those boom weeks where he's got 18 points or 23 points, but he's got a lot of 2s and 5s and 6s in here as well.
Yeah, he's very, very much boom or bust. He's, they line him up the backfield. They do a bunch of stuff with him, try to get the ball in his hands. But, as we've talked about this whole entire season, there's so many wide receivers that demand some attention there in Green Bay that sometimes he gets lost in the weeds there. Who is the bleeder?
Well, again, I want to bring up a couple names here, and one of them is going to be jointly the tight end position. Cade Otton, you had a great comment a few weeks ago that once Mike Evans returns, Otton, who had been kind of coming on toward the middle part of the season, might take a little bit of a hit in production, and that has been the case with Mike Evans back. He at one point had 4 touchdowns in 4 games. He now does not have a touchdown in his last 3. So that production at the tight end position is a little bit of a struggle. Kyle Pitts for the Falcons on Jake's bench this week has been equally, if not more, miserable. he's sort of another guy that came on in sort of weeks 5 through 8 and then has been, under 10 fantasy points, including a 0 this week. Only 41% of the snaps. I don't know if that was injury related or what the deal was, but both of his tight ends right now trending down for Jake. The other thing I just wanted to mention, because I thought it was an interesting stat, Alvin Kamara has been so good this season. He's number 3 at the running back position, but does not have a touchdown since week 6. He's now in a 6-game scoreless drought, and that is through the air and on the ground. So I believe that's the case. Let me make sure. Yeah,
right.
only one receiving touchdown. So interesting that he's still very, very productive from a fantasy standpoint, but not getting into the end zone.
I mean, talk about another team that's been destroyed by injuries. It's Alvin Kamara and everybody else. And now Tyson Hill is also done for the season. That's only going to help his value going forward. Red zone looks, he's going to get the carries. I'm interested to see if they start using Jamal Williams more. He's been kind of just an afterthought this season. But with Tyson Hill now being out, I wonder if he kind of eats in a little more. But again, Alvin Kamara, you're number 3 and haven't scored a touchdown since week 6. It's just the volume play. The amount of volume he gets week in and week out is very, very impressive. But let's go over to the Columbia Clown College. Sorry, Mike, that we have to talk about you again. 107.34. I don't even know if you listen to this anymore. But let's go over your roster. Jared Goff has an okay day here. 221, 2 touchdowns, 16 points. Aaron Jones, only 5 carries in this one, 22 yards. Does score a touchdown through the air, 8 points. James Conner, who got a new contract very recently, 17 carries, 68 yards, 3 for 4, 13 for 9 points. Tyreek Hill catches a touchdown in this one, 6 for 9, 83 and a touchdown. Quentin Johnson, Mike decides to start him, 2 for 4, 12 yards. Marvin Harrison, 5 for 12, 60 yards and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, 13 targets in this one, 68 points. Starts Austin Eckler in this one. Believe he got hurt in this game and now is on IR. So a 0 there. Myers has 11 and the Seahawks have 17. On the bench, Anthony Richardson has a nice game, has 21 points. He was a late season pickup for Mike. And, we always have to mention him. Isaiah Likely did catch a touchdown on this one as well. 5 for 8, 38 yards. So interesting there. My leader for Mike, let's talk about Marvin Harrison. Now wide receiver number 22, has had a disappointing season, based on he was drafted in the 2nd round. But he's really the only wide receiver they really have. I know Trey McBride gets a lot of targets, but 14 points, 88% snap count, 12 targets, which is his season high. So you'd like to see that trending in the right direction. And scores a touchdown on this one. Now wide receiver number 22. Be very, Mike's season's over. It's whatever. But what I kind of want to talk about is where does he go next year? It's been kind of an up and down season for him. I don't think he's not going in the 2nd round next year. But he could be somebody where, he gets one full season under his belt and really explodes onto the scene next season.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we talked about Cortland Sutton, who's the number 7 receiver last week on the podcast, I think, and we said that we thought he would go in maybe the 4th. Did we say 3rd, 4th?
And their 3rd.
Yeah,
so
if he's number 7 on the
year.
He's number 7 on the year. Harrison is number 22 on the year. Obviously, we expect him to maybe have a second year kind of bump, potentially.
He's probably going to go where Cortland Sutton went this year.
He was a 2nd round pick this year for Mike. I don't know. I mean, 4th round.
My first reaction was 5th round next year.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, not the year that he wanted, but definitely shows promise, and he's going to be better than this. He's way too talented. He just needs to get a little more consistent on the same page with Kyler Murray.
Yeah, by my sort of rough kind of look at his targets and his receptions on the year, he's only catching about 50% of his
Yeah,
targets. So maybe another year, maybe this is his rookie season with Kyler Murray. Maybe those two will work in the offseason and get more comfortable with each other. And that efficiency, if that comes up next year, he is going to be a lot better. So
for sure,
I think he definitely could be trending up going into next year.
for sure, for sure. Who is the bleeder?
The bleeder on this team. We've talked about the Jets in recent weeks. Both of these Jets receivers were terribly inefficient.
We're talking
Adams
about
got caught.
we're talking about Mike's team.
Oh, we're talking about Mike's team. Sorry, I'm going back to Jake. Did we talk about Jake's team yet?
Did we do a
No,
bleeder for him?
did we?
Yeah, you did the tight
Oh yeah,
ends.
sorry, the
Kate
tight
Otten
ends.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pitts.
All right, well that's why
Keep
I
it
didn't talk
together.
about the Jets. We talked about Kate Otten. Bleeder for this team. Well, two of them that stand out. Quentin Johnston. Um, Really another guy that popped kind of mid-season with a couple nice performances in weeks 9 through 11, but now back-to-back duds. He had a 0 last week. He has just two catches for 12 yards, so combined 12 yards in his last 2 weeks. That's awful for the Chargers. Quentin Johnson there, and then Aaron Jones. You mentioned it, just 5 carries in this game. I think he lost. Did he? He
He
lost
lost a
two
fumble.
fumbles.
He lost one, but he did have two
Oh, but
fumbles.
fumbled twice.
Yep.
Fumbled twice and lost one. So just, yeah, not very good. His snaps in recent weeks have been trending down. He's in the 50% pretty consistently. 3 of his last 4 in the 50 percentile of snap percentage. So his luckily his yards per carry has sort of recovered from a little bit of a dip, but his snap percentage has not. He is kind of is a little bit touchdown dependent these days,
Yeah.
in my opinion. I
I mean,
mean, he's only been over.
He's still running back 17.
Yeah,
So maybe that's a little. I mean, that's high end
a little
too.
hard. Yeah,
So, but yeah, I tend to agree. His best days are behind him, I believe.
yep.
Okay. Bye weeks. Not that it matters, but might as well talk about it.
Oh, bye weeks for Mike next week. Let's see what he's got. Not a whole lot in the starting lineup. Some bench players. Bateman, who's hurt anyway. Adonai Mitchell, who's not a starter anyway, and that's really it. So not really any bye week situations. Obviously, Eckler on IR, so we'll have to replace who was a flex spot guy this week. So yeah, but not really hurting in the bye department for Mike.
Okay. So let's go to our last matchup of the week, and that would be yours. Going to 8-5, you scored 109.86 to Owings Mills Ogres, who get the win in this one. 5-8 on the season, 111.48. Starting with Alex's squad, CJ Stroud again, up and down season a lot. Now quarterback number 15, which is kind of shocking to me. Really, the sophomore slump has hit him pretty hard. Hasn't had a 20-point game since week 4, which is also kind of surprising to me. So really been a disappointment this year. Gibbs, 9 carries for 87 yards, 2 for 417. Does lose a fumble in this one for 9 points. Kareem Hunt kind of taking a backseat to Pacheco, 7 carries, 15 yards. DJ Moore, 16 targets, 97 yards and a touchdown. Amon Ra, 5 for 7, 73 yards. Zay Flowers, 3 for 7, 74. David Njoku, 17 targets, 52 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Nick Chubb has 9 carries, 21, and catches a touchdown. Justin Tucker, I want to see what ranking he is. He is still kicker number 9 on the season. Misses a couple in this one. And the Bengals have 5. On the bench, nothing really too interesting to talk about. Maybe Dallas Goedert, Jalen Warren maybe, but nothing too much there. The leader has to be David Njoku, though. 17 targets on the day, his most of the season, 9 catches, 2 touchdowns. Kind of up and down since Jameis has become the starter, 14-5, 14-3, 21. So kind of inconsistent there, but I would say that, Jameis looks for him, and he's a big body target around the end zone or in the red zone. When he scores touchdowns, he can have these 21-point games where, he looks like a top 5 tight end.
Yeah, I mean, that volume is just silly. I mean, look, Alex won this week on the back of David Njoku with 17 targets and 16 targets for DJ Moore. I mean, two guys that just absolutely dominated in their games. Njoku, really, I mean, watching him, he is really such a great target for that Browns offense. He's fun to watch, except when you're facing him in fantasy. He's quick, he's big, he has good hands, and he catches a lot of his targets. Just 9 for 17, but hey, you're not going to complain about 9 receptions in this one. He's now been a top 10 tight end in 4 of the last 6 games on the season, so he has definitely been performing well. I think we've talked about his schedule moving forward. It's pretty good in terms of teams that, points against the tight end. Pittsburgh is a good defense, but is on the better side of matchups for tight ends. And then Kansas City, Cincinnati, Miami, and Baltimore, all good matchups the rest of the way. So, yeah, huge game. Definitely, a factor in that wild Monday night game, and the big reason why Alex comes away with a win.
And who is the bleeder for Alex's squad?
Ruh-roh, Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
What is going to be his role when Pacheco comes back? Well, it's going to be 7 carries. It's going to be 38% of snap share. Man, you kind of feel a little bit bad. Like, I like Kareem Hunt. He's been a good fantasy player for a while now. He's defied expectations several times in his career, and he's been doing that so far. After the Chiefs signed him earlier on in the season with Pacheco's injury, and he sort of gets relegated to backup duty again. So thankless work by Kareem Hunt for several weeks. Pacheco is back, and clearly that snap share is, not looking good. Luckily, Nick Chubb has returned and is in the flex spot, likely will be in the RB2 spot for Alex moving forward, but questions about his workload also remain. So just a question of volume. There's not really a lot on the bench in terms of the running back position to sort of provide juice behind Chubb and Gibbs at this point.
Okay, and let's go with the bye week situation for Alex.
Buys. Well, start at the top. C.J. Stroud going to be on bye for this game, meaning that Geno Smith at Arizona will be the play, barring any moves by Alex. Also going to be without the services of Zay Flowers, who has, kind of been up and down, but has been,
He's
pretty
wide receiver
consistent.
number 9.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess that's true. He only has one 20-point game and several 5 or less point games. So
That's
it
shocking
kind of
to me.
feels like, I know, right? Any game could be great or it could be mediocre. So also has not had his bye, so that is a little bit inflated because not
True.
having the bye. So yeah, we'll be without Flowers, we'll be without Stroud, we'll be without Justin Tucker, and we'll be without Tank Dell. So kind of none of the huge kind of playmakers. You still have your Lions, Gibbs, and Brown, who've led this team all year, but are going to be missing some key weapons.
Yeah, and at 5-8,
And
again, the most interesting team, I would say, in terms of teams looking in to get into the playoffs, just with the amount of points that he has. If he can get a win and some losses, comes down to tiebreakers.
Yeah, that game, Njoku and Chubb against Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh is going to be critical for. He's really going to need those two guys to deal some damage to a Steelers team that's played pretty well this season.
Okay, and let's go over to the other side here. You are now 8-5 on the season, 109.86. Joe Burrow has 19 points. It's perfectly fine. 309, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Does lose 2 fumbles in this one as well, so it should have even been a bigger day without those 2 fumbles. Hubbard here, Chua Hubbard, 12 carries, 43 yards, a fumble loss, 2.3 points. James Cook, 14 carries, 107 and a touchdown in that snowy game for 18 points. Shakir, 4 for 7, 30 yards, 5 points. Jalen Waddle, 4 for 4, 53, and a 2-point conversion for 9.3. A.J. Brown, 5 for 6, 66 for 9 points. T.J. Hawkinson, 3 for 6, 28 yards. Kyron Williams, 15 carries, 104, and a touchdown. Catches one ball for 9 yards for 17 points. Will Lutz has 11, and Denver has 13. On the bench, Jonathan Brooks, a little bit involved. Got 6 carries in this one. Bucky Irving, 25 carries, 152, and a touchdown. Huge day for him. My leader for your squad is Bucky Irving. You need to get him in the lineup. I don't care who it is, but you need to get him in. He does have a hip injury, but he says he downplays it. He's downplaying it, so maybe something to keep an eye on. 54% snap count, but 25 carries, 152, 6 yards per carry, and a touchdown. Just very, very impressive. Last 3 weeks, 16, 24, 26. So he's getting the work even with White there as well. Has Vegas, Chargers, Dallas, which 2 of those 3 are pretty good matchups there. Running back number 16. He is my leader for your squad in week 13.
Yeah, I mean, very, very close, up to an hour within the game starting that I was considering getting him into the lineup. It was just a question of how to get him into the lineup with Kyron Williams, James Cook, and Chuba Hubbard, all essentially top 12 running backs, really, on the season. So just very difficult to get Bucky Irving into the lineup. It was Hubbard, who we'll talk about in a minute, that had the down performance and will be the hole that Bucky Irving fills in weeks moving forward. But his role in this offense he's just so exciting to watch. Talk about a guy like Jamar Chase being exciting. So is Irving. He's a small, undersized, quick back, but 25 carries, my goodness. Like, Rachaad White was still used in this game, but Irving is just turning into a monster from both sides of the ball. It was kind of thought that maybe like Trey Tucker, who kind of had a couple good weeks there a few weeks back, that he might become the main rushing back, and Irving and White will split sort of the passing downs work, but Irving has just emerged as a superstar in the NFL. He will definitely, as long as he's healthy, he will be in the lineup for Chuba Hubbard moving forward.
And who is your bleeder for your squad?
The bleeder this week was collectively the wide receivers that have been giving me issues. Ever since I lost Rashee Rice, this wide receiver core has just not been able to sort of put kind of solid games up on the same at the same time. Waddle had a great week last week. In week 12. Brown has had some nice weeks this season. Shakir has not really had a huge week since he's come over to my team, but none of these guys have put it together sort of at the same time. So, under 10 fantasy points for all 3 of these guys, 4 targets, 6 targets, and 7 targets. So no huge target monsters for any of these guys in week 13. Collectively, I need at least one of those guys to play better than they are every single week in order to have a shot at making a run in the playoffs.
Okay. Do you have any bye week issues this week?
Kind of moderate, nothing too crazy. We'll be missing a kicker. We'll need to make a move. Demario Douglas, who was a bench depth guy for me, and then the Denver Broncos defense, who's been really good this season, sort of preemptively picked up the Saints a week or so ago, knowing that the Broncos were going to be on bye. They're coming off of the Broncos are coming off of 3 straight 10-point games, so they'll be missed. They're the number 2 defense, but the Saints with a good matchup at the Giants on Sunday.
Yeah. Very good preemptively. Who do they play this week? They play the Giants. That's perfect for you.
Yeah.
And how horrible they are. Okay, but let's just take a peek real quick. This is going a little long, but let's just take a peek at week 14. Union Bridge Barracudas 6-7 go against the Carlisle Cheddar 7-6. The Orchard Beach Ovaries 9-4 go against the Pasadena Plague 5-8. Pikesville Pink Pony Club 7-6 go against the Columbia Clown College 3-10. Owings Mills Ogres 5-8 go against the Westminster Wonder Boys 6-7. Westminster Warbirds 8-5 go against the Cockeysville Cocks 7-6. And the Reisterstown Rockets 10-3 go against the Finksburg Freaks 5-8. So that is our show. Thank you all for listening. and we will do the last one of the regular season next week. I'm not sure if we're going to do any playoff. Maybe we'll do a couple of abbreviated ones for playoff matchups. But thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.